The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio streaming and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. This week, I'm going to talk about something that's been affecting me a lot personally, and it's been doing a bit of a number on my mood, and it may upset some other people to talk about it. And I assure you my intent isn't to upset anyone. It's to make people take a moment to consider what's really driving their own decision making in the hopes of people making better, fairer choices, because everybody's mental health has been taking a knock lately, I think, right? We're all under additional stress. So why put more out there? And bad choices lead to regret. Regret doesn't lead to happiness unless you do something about it to get closure on the regret. So I'm going to talk about a difficult topic. Anti-immigrant bias. What does this have to do with mental health? Like I said, it says deeper things about the way we make decisions, and that's why I think it's useful. There's some concepts we can talk about to understand better. I've been hearing quite a few anti-immigrant comments of late, usually in the context of the upcoming Canadian election, the cost of housing, and various comments about society suffering because something immigrants. And it can be a big thing, like violent crime. It can be a small thing, like just petty annoyances, but I've noticed an uptick, and the statistics on things like Islamophobia bear me out. The thing that struck me is these comments, these anti-immigrant comments, aren't coming from the usual suspects. They aren't coming from people you think of as nationalists or supremacists, right? They're coming from people whose loved ones are immigrants. So the comments jump from immigrants in general to a certain kind of immigrant, usually with brown skin and, some connection to Islam. Occasionally it's Muslim people complaining about Sikhs or Hindus, but this has been something I've observed my entire life, though there's documented evidence of the bias against immigrants going back to at least 1896, along with attempts at disproving the negative opinions of immigrants with facts. Yeah, we've been trying to solve this problem with facts since 1896, at least. We've been probably trying to solve this since 1492, or sooner, the Bering Strait, immigrant attitudes, right? It's this thing. It's a tale as old as time. And I think we can say, since it's been going on that long, the facts don't really sway people. The challenge about talking about anti-immigrant sentiment is that it's rooted in a combination of factors. So you address one, and you can only address one thing at a time. The person's opinion slides to another component. People don't like the idea that they hold xenophobic, even racist views. You're going to have a hard time persuading someone that a very strong emotionally driven viewpoint doesn't fit the facts. Because in a battle of emotions and facts, emotions win every time, no matter how strong the facts are. Now, what's going on with these emotions? The three main psychological concepts I've noticed, and the data's really murky because you look up papers on this and it's things like, okay, here are the facts. Like I said, the facts don't work. What's driving it? The three main psychological concepts underlying negative attitudes towards immigrants are something called in-group bias, something called confirmation bias that you're probably more familiar with, and of course, resistance to change. The good news when it comes to persuading people is that racism and xenophobia, these are likely byproducts of these three types of bias: in-group bias, confirmation bias, and resistance to change, not the cause. Now, the reason I say that's good, yay, racism is a symptom, not the cause. Well, have you ever tried to tell someone, hey, that thing you just said, that's racist? how many times did they just go, "You're right, thank you for telling me," right? They usually freak out. They usually, it becomes very confrontational because, and this is documented, people think, well, racism is bad and I'm a good person, so I can't be racist. You must be wrong. And why are you being mean to me with this wrong statement? It's completely counter to logic. And a lot of people are probably nodding their heads because, yep, that's exactly the reaction they got. Now, this is an example that, hypothetical series of thoughts. This is an example of confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to seek out, give more weight to, and remember information in a way that confirms or supports our prior beliefs or values. Basically, that's a long way of saying people look for stuff that agrees with them and downplay stuff that doesn't. So if you just go and suggest your friends' attitudes towards immigration are racist, they're going to instantly recall examples of when they weren't racist. They were the opposite of racist. And so that's proof you're wrong. Maybe you're the real racist, buddy, right? Confirmation bias is at play when someone uses a single news story or a handful of news stories to prove immigrants or trans people or white boys are dangerous. And I throw in white boys because have you heard about this Netflix show, Adolescence? Because I've heard a lot about it to the point that I started watching it. Now, Adolescence is a 4-part standalone drama produced in the United Kingdom. And I was asked for my opinions by people online, so I gave them. And I immediately got comments insisting that the show was whitewashing immigrant crimes. Some very loud voices on the internet seemed to think that this show, Adolescence, was inspired by the stabbing in Southport, UK, of girls at a Taylor Swift-inspired dance party. They think that this show, Adolescence, was inspired by this real-life horrible act of violence. Here's the problem. Adolescence went into pre-production in February of 2024, meaning at that point, they already had the concept and the script was already written. The Southport stabbings took place in July of 2024, which means it's not possible that it was inspired by that stabbing unless UK screenwriters can time travel like Doctor Who now. Probably not. It had nothing to do with that. It doesn't matter to most people that the Southport stabber wasn't an immigrant. He was born in Cardiff, which is part of the UK. But his parents, well, they were from Rwanda, and the killer was black. That's enough for some people to go immigrant, and no amount of pointing out that he was not an immigrant will satisfy them. First, they saw that he was an immigrant online. Then his parents were immigrants and he's evil, so it must be the immigration, right? That is a combination of prejudice, but also once people get convinced of something and they've changed their minds, like, oh, it's so horrible, getting them to change it back, especially when it, makes them look kind of sort of racist, that's very, very hard to do. But it gets worse. It gets worse because the reason that this show Adolescence has tongues wagging everywhere is that it centers on a white 13-year-old boy from a white middle-class family who stabbed a white female classmate. Because the white character bears some similar biographical information to, real life criminals, people fallaciously argue that it's based on a specific event, right? Instead of the show just leaning on common conceptions of what leads a nice white boy from a nice white family to commit murder. And some of these conceptions are wrong. For instance, the show suggests that bullying was part of this 13-year-old's motive. there's no really good evidence that being bullied makes a teenager more likely to kill anybody. In fact, the people who show more of a propensity to violence are, well, shouldn't be surprising, the bullies. In fact, adults who were bullied as youths show greater reactivity to witnessing violence than those who were not bullied. That means they like violence less than the average person, right? The greatest predictor of homicide is growing up around violence, prior criminal activity, and a personal history of violence. And even those are modest predictors because, well, homicides are relatively rare. But if you follow a lot of these, what we call juvenile cases, but they involve teens, there were warning signs. It didn't just come out of nowhere. But this show has taken the UK by storm. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, he said this show should be shown in schools. It's supposed to be targeted at reducing violent misogyny. But of course, in the second episode of the show still has a scene where a black female student snaps and beats up a white male schoolmate with the police standing right there. I had my head in my hands at the time. It's like, really? Really? Of course, the usual suspects object to these screening in schools. You know, Boris Johnson, remember him? Elon Musk, yep, him too. My concern with the show being shown in schools and being this thing pushed on parents is that it makes these things sound certain and universal when they're not. Parents listening, there's no standardization regarding the meanings of colored heart emojis. Don't look up what different colors of hearts mean in emojis. Don't look them up online. There will be different meanings on different lists. They're probably wrong. And if they weren't wrong before this, they're wrong now because the whole point of teenagers speaking to each other in code is that their parents don't know what they're saying. This has been a thing about teenagers for a while now. But this idea that, oh, I can watch a show and know what these things that could harm my child are. No. There's no shortcut, right? You have to, they say talk to your teen. But talking to your teen these days, a lot of it's like, what you do at school? I don't know. Stuff. Well, what was the highlight of your day? I don't know, something. Right? Teens are not exactly forthcoming with information. You have to take opportunities to listen. But people don't want the uncertainty of spend more time with your kid and they might open up to you. No. People like certainty, not the uncertainty of maybe, definitely. Because definitely makes life easy. And people don't really care. The data has shown for decades that immigrants commit crimes at a lower rate than people born in the US or Canada. Because, well, if that's not the source of crime, then the source of crime is a lot more difficult. And hey, well, okay, maybe it's not the only source of crime, but it's an easy part to deal with, right? And even if you can talk them down from that bit of doublethink, at this point in the conversation, the anti-immigrant person likely pivots to another thing they don't like about immigrants without conceding that they were wrong about the accusation of criminality. Why? I'll get to that after the break. Do you have a story you think would be good for the show? Are you interested in sponsoring the show? Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is my website. That first, Liana at nottherapyshow.com was my email. At nottherapyshow on social media. We'll be back after this talking why people don't like immigrants and they don't like you trying to change their minds after this. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in That's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about immigrants, why people hate on them so hard, and the psychological concepts underpinning that. Before the break, I talked about the fact that anti-immigrant sentiment, any bigotry, quite frankly, is an emotional reaction, not a logical one. But there are trends that we can look at and we can appeal to, right? It's a combination of in-group bias, confirmation bias, and resistance to change. Now, we talked about how people use high-profile crimes to confirm their anti-immigrant bias, even though the statistic is that immigrants are far less likely to commit crimes. Some statistics I've seen are 60% less likely to commit any crimes. Granted, that's going to be different region to region, right? Not only that, we talked about how recent sensational homicides were claimed to be the work of immigrants, even though they weren't. I always struggle with that part, right? Why do people care more if it's an immigrant that harmed somebody? I don't get why murder is more bad or less bad based on a person's place of birth. Murder's bad no matter who does it. And putting blame in the wrong place because, if it's an immigrant, they're different from us. We don't have to take a look at what we're doing, right? That doesn't solve the problem because it's wrong. But confirmation bias is powerful, really powerful. So people tend to remember that violent anecdote about immigrants, that single piece of evidence that doesn't fit the trend. They're less persuaded by how much immigrants fuel our social services, our tax base. There's been a few articles lately about how some doctors in the US are thinking about moving to Canada. And guess what? Those doctors will be immigrants. Oh, but not those kinds of immigrants, right? And that's when this whole discussion gets icky. When we dig into the good kinds of immigrants versus bad kinds of immigrants, it really does seem like an issue not of country of origin, but different races, religions, cultures, and languages, right? Not migration per se. Now, I'm going to give you some facts about immigrants, true facts. I triple check these. And I suspect it won't sway some people at all, right? Refugees who arrived in Canada as children have a higher completion rate of high school, college, university, and graduate degrees compared to children born in Canada. That's a statistic shown refugees are good, see? But somebody with confirmation bias is going to see, you see, they're keeping our kids out of the best schools. Here's another one. As of 2021, immigrants accounted for 1 out of every 4 healthcare sector workers in Canada. 37% of pharmacists, 36% of physicians, 39% of dentists, 23% of registered nurses, and 35% of nursing aides and personal support workers related occupations. Now, even though we still have a healthcare worker shortage, despite all that, you'll hear some people complaining about the declining quality of healthcare workers because of immigration, right? You can twist the fact to fit the pre-existing framing, right? Another one, immigrants make up 34% of people working in scientific research and development across Canada. When I bring up that one, people point to the handful of these workers who turned out to be spies. If you want any sort of public pension when you retire, the argument goes, we need immigrants. The statistic is in 1971, Canada's worker to retiree ratio was 7-1, meaning 7 working people for every 1 retiree in 1971. By 2035, when 5 million Canadians are going to retire, the ratio of worker to retirees is 2-1. So 2 workers for every 1 retiree. If we don't keep our population up, our social programs become insolvent. That doesn't just mean the Canada Pension Plan. That means health care. But you hear more about the drain people perceive that immigrants have on the system, not what they put into the system. A big thing that comes up a lot is housing. Immigrants are driving up the cost of housing. Even the federal government said so. And that's true. The federal government did say that things like foreign students, international students, were spiking the price of rental properties. The cost of housing right now is not high just because of immigration. High interest rates on mortgages are a big thing. Inflation is driving up the cost of building materials. There are continued supply chain disruptions, which are affecting new housing starts in building. Then there's zoning laws, but we don't have time to get into that. And people don't tend to think of international university students when they think about dangerous, terrible immigrants, right? Maybe now they're like, oh, they're driving up the price of housing, but that's not normally the stereotype that people have in their head. They also don't think of all those downtowners who panicked during COVID and overpaid for houses outside the city. Yeah, we don't think of those people as immigrants. And yet they flooded the suburbs and rural areas with their downtown money, rudeness, and pretentiousness. They were clearly not from around here. But not that kind of immigrant, right? None of these fact-based arguments work on someone with a xenophobic bias because they don't appeal to the root of where the opinion comes from. It's just so simple to cling to easy and wrong. The idea if we just kicked out all the foreigners, things would be better. This is in-group bias at work. In-group bias is powerful, meaning you feel warmly towards people you see as like you. You feel negatively or less warmly to people who you see as not like you. In experiments where people were placed into groups randomly, in-group bias still showed up. And that suggests it's purely emotional. It's not based on anything really rational. You have the emotional drive, and then you find reasons to back up the pre-existing feeling. Now, March Madness just ended in NCAA basketball, and I had to confront my long-standing bias against Duke University. Yep, Cooper Flagg, undoubtedly a great player. The Duke defense was ungodly good. Same for its offense. I really thought they were going to take it this year. They just seemed unstoppable. And I was glad when they got eliminated by the University of Houston in a come from behind. Did anybody watch that? Oh, whoa, I missed it. I was following the score on my phone. And even then, I was happy. Houston, people beat Duke. The fact that it was Houston just made it so much more poetic. And if you don't know why, that's okay. Because the point behind this is I was being pretty prejudiced. It really should just be about the team who plays best, they win. They're college students, right? But it's kind of like the New England Patriots in the NFL. American sports just has this undeniable undercurrent of class and racial politics woven through who we emotionally root for. It affects us. And denying this in-group bias, this out-group intolerance, isn't going to make us more resistant to these effects. We've got to be aware of it so that we're not controlled by it. In short, it's the they not like us factor. Now, people who listen to the show know I love that song. But let's talk. It's not just the apparent privilege, right? The frustration of teams like, the Duke Blue Devils or the New England Patriots always being in championship contention. There's this perceived moral judgment, like there's something inherently wrong about those people that our kind just doesn't get on with. Kendrick Lamar went there when he referred to Drake as a colonizer, and even if the metaphor isn't technically literally true or kind of even possible for one person, the emotional weight was there. We got the metaphor. Of course, Kendrick's more recent music, notably the latest banger, Squabble Up. I love Squabble Up. But it talks about him not being the talented upstart anymore. Kendrick's at the top of his game now. He played the freaking Super Bowl. There's nowhere to look up. No one to look up to. Now what? Well, now he samples that. Remember that song from 1982? When I hear music, it makes me dance. He samples that. white music in his tracks. I thought that was very interesting, and this is why people respect Kendrick Lamar. He makes points. The points don't make him. There's a fine line between trusting your gut, validating your feelings. These are good things. Fine line between that and being prejudiced, which is obviously not a good thing. Being discriminating in your thinking is not the same as discriminating in your actions. And I want to be clear, I'm not arguing some sort of moral be kind to others riff here. I'm acknowledging that decisions made from prejudice are bad decisions. They don't end well for the people making these decisions, certainly not in the long run, but often not in the short run either. In-group bias makes us selfishly stupid, as opposed to engaging in rational self-interest. Saying we value diversity of opinion, saying it, is far easier than actually doing it, because welcoming competing views is tiring, and we only have so much emotional and mental energy, especially when the people around us are having strong emotions too. But if you don't want to be that person I've observed lately, I've listened to, who's dating or married to an immigrant, well, you're ranting about immigrants wrecking stuff. It's important to keep an eye on your in-group bias. And for those of you also dealing with these conversations, you may want to use the term in-group bias when talking to people about their negative attitudes, because it's less charged than dropping the term racism. Again, you won't win an emotional argument with someone on facts. You certainly won't win an emotional argument by adding more negative emotion to the argument. In order to get through to someone regarding their anti-immigrant bias or anything like it, anti-trans bias, anti-gay bias, anti-Duke bias, right? You have to find a way to make those immigrants move from the not like us category into the like us category. Points of commonality lead to integration. A focus on what you think someone is getting wrong doesn't. I told myself, Cooper Flagg, yeah, he looks like he's like a basketball nerd. He's basketball autism. I'm not saying he has autism. I'm just saying that dude, he's like a machine. I'm like, okay, he's kind of nerdy. Now he's like me. Okay, now I can be cool with the guy. It's so stupid and it's so selfish, but hey, it works, right? He's 18, 19 years old. Why am I hating on this guy? He's a kid. Well, legally an adult, but you know what I mean. Now, I'm fortunate because I grew up in a neighborhood with a large immigrant population. Shout out to Jane Finch. So, immigrants for me are in the like me category. Now, that's not me trying to claim I'm better than anyone else. That's an accident of birth. My upbringing was just different. I had more experience with peers who had different cultural backgrounds. So it's less of a change for me when I interact with people from different cultures. So what are some more tips with dealing with people who voice anti-immigrant views? How can you deal with anti-immigrant fears in yourself? I'll talk more about that if I can speak after the break. Blah, blah. Anyway, questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com is my email. Nottherapyshow.com is my website. At nottherapyshow is my socials. Would love to hear from you when we come back. More on anti-immigrant bias, what to do about it, and others and yourself on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about what's going on from a mental health perspective, from a feelings perspective with anti-immigrant views. What to do if you spot them in your friends or yourself. Now, spring tends to be peak religious plurality season here in Canada. Ramadan just finished. Passover starts this weekend. Easter's on the 20th. And we're in an election period, which means the meaning of being a Canadian is being actively debated. Foreign interference and foreign bullying are constantly in the news lately. And that's in the backdrop of the fact that times are just tougher for many of us, especially financially, than they've ever been. Now, this is all a perfect combination to produce xenophobia. And I used the term xenophobia before, but I didn't define it. Xenophobia is a dislike of anything strange or foreign. Now, I personally believe that Canada's multiculturalism is a beautiful thing. And I believe that inclusion is part of the Canadian identity. But with inclusion comes constant change. And change is hard. And openness to new experiences is a personality trait that some people are higher in than others. And I was not able to confirm that that connects to anti-immigrant views. But I think that part of the reason I'm, okay with this stuff, or maybe I have an openness to new experience because I grew up around a lot of immigrants. Chicken, egg, I don't know, right? It's easy to write off anti-immigrant sentiment as some sort of white nationalism, right, or white supremacy, but every people has their bigotries. Within a span of a couple of days last week, a friend of mine, their partner had just gotten their PR, their permanent residency, right? So this romantic partner of an immigrant complained rather vehemently about South Asian immigrants. Now, they're not Arab immigrants. They're Arab immigrants, not South Asian. He's an Uber driver. That will be important because the next day, someone also married to somebody who's not white complained that immigrant Uber drivers are menaces on the road. Yes, the Asian drivers stereotype is back. Before that, it was women drivers, right? The complaints don't seem to change. The people they're directed at just seem to cycle. And there is a cycle, right? One person complains about one type of immigrant, and then the type of immigrant their partner is gets complained about by somebody else. And I'm sitting here going, what? This is all just emotion. It's all just emotion. Because complaining about the other, the outgroup, the foreigner is a hard thing to change. And we know that it's especially hard to change, to stop doing, for people who feel on the margins of the in-group in question. People who are marginalized in a group are more likely to defend that group. Even the things that seem negative, they'll identify with negative stereotypes about that group to feel more centered in the group because inherently they're not. Now, I talk about this because of the marginalizing effect of economic insecurity. When economic times are good, people are more welcoming and tolerant. When times are tough and people get scared, well, having a live and let live attitude is a much greater challenge, to say the least. And right now, there's a lot of us wondering, can things get any worse? Right? Things are so expensive. Everyone seems angry. Too many people are directing that anger at easy targets. And immigrants are a perennial favorite for easy targets, precisely because they're vulnerable. Right? If you drive by and you'll go back to where you came from for somebody, you think you're never going to see them again. You're in a car, they're walking, they can't do anything about it, right? But they're not the only vulnerable people in our society. There's the bullied kid in school. They're very vulnerable. That kid who's okay to pick on. And now we've added another excuse to be cruel, going back to the adolescence thing. Oh, he's an incel. Yeah, 12-year-olds are getting hit with the involuntarily celibate insult. Oh no, it's not about them now. They're predicting the future. They're saying this boy is not going to get laid ever. Like, what is going on? It's easy to pick on them because you can. It's a permission structure, right? It's so easy to bully people online, especially because you can't see the immediate pain on their faces. But sometimes the pain is the point. There are some people who are really lacking in empathy. The pain makes it fun for them. And one ringleader with these sorts of antisocial tendencies can skew an entire peer group. The cruelty becomes the point because when someone is being cruel, they feel stronger and less vulnerable. Now, here's another personal example. And this is very petty, and that's why I'm bringing this up. When I worked in TV, I knew that every time I showed up to one of the special events, there was a 50-50 chance I'd be left off the staff list. And it's probably higher than that. More times than not, I was not on that list, even though I was working the event. Why? Because the people whose job it was to put me on the list could humiliate me that way. I don't even think it was because they personally disliked me. Back then, back in the day, I thought, wow, these people hate me. But in hindsight, I don't think they thought much about me at all. I think I just didn't have any strong supporters within that company, and it was a toxic company. So there was this instinct about who was easy prey. It was that kind of place. I think most of us have some kind of memory like that. Now, personally, my entire life has been like that. Going right back to, elementary school, grade 1, I started, my kindergarten for junior closed. I went to senior kindergarten, grade 1, went to the gifted, skipped grade 2, right? 2 years in the gifted, came back because it was too far away. I had to take the bus at 9 years old. Not the school bus, the TTC. So, okay, parents didn't want me to do that. Came back, bounced around. They cut junior high school. It was just a series of interesting events. I didn't stay in a school for more than 2 years at a time. So I was always the new kid. Always the new kid. Every 2 years, the new kid. Ugh. We all have a choice with what we do with those vulnerable, lonely, painful memories. We can pay forward the pain and grow the cruelty economy, or we can say to ourselves, I didn't like being treated that way, so I'm going to treat other people better than that. That's the way I relate to people like immigrants. I know what it's like to be new to a place and be vulnerable. For me, it was just I didn't speak the slang, never mind the entire language. But even that made me easy to pick on. You don't have the right clothes. You don't have the right hair. You don't fit in. So I avoid treating people who are like me that way, in the cruel way that I was treated. Way back in high school, I always befriended the ESL student. Why? Because I would have liked somebody to do it for me. Now, I'm sure that the people I know who express anti-immigrant views, they would never say that to a person's face, right? There is a part of us that does grow out of high school. But I still think it's a good habit to get out of saying at all. And I'll tell you why after the break. I know change is hard, so there has to be something in it for you, right? Resistance to change is the reason that this thing just keeps coming back. So that's after the break in our final segment. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website, at nottherapyshow on socials. Please, any comments at all, suggestions for shows. We'll be back after this talking about anti-immigrant sentiment on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. And for a change this week, I actually balanced the segments fairly decently. Hey, go me. When I went long, a bit off the top, but here we are. Nice, meaty last segment. And, I talked before the break about why even if you're not saying anti-immigrant things to someone's face who is an immigrant, why maybe it's a habit you should break. because it comes out of these cognitive distortions, these in-group biases. It's fueled by confirmation bias. All of these things not only make you a less proficient critical thinker, but they also probably leave you unhappy, because fear of the other is just that, fear. And if you're going around living a frightened existence instead of, something where you make rational risk reward calculations and sort of act affirmatively and confidently, you're going to be less happy, right? The idea of, a top 10 phrase, don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. This really comes up when we talk about our opinions and treatment of immigrants, because we can't help feeling vulnerable. You can't help that bad experience you may have had with a group. If you just feel overwhelmed or out of place when you're in a place, that everybody's speaking a different language that you don't understand. I was in a mall a couple weeks back and they were literally speaking Swahili and I didn't understand a word, but I sat there and I kind of listened to it going, okay, can I pick out anything? Can I get any sense of inflection or rhythms of the conversation or anything like that? All I know is the hot sauce in the mall food court was really, really good. And that was my takeaway, right? But I deliberately play games in foreign languages with subtitles, no English dub. And part of it is just keeping up that openness. Openness to new experiences is something tied to a certain amount of success and a certain amount of a happier outlook, better mental health. So it's a muscle worth stretching. But also, this is about how that person you're telling these opinions, you think it's okay because this person isn't an immigrant, right? Or certainly not the bad immigrants that we're talking about here. So it's safe. But you don't know what that person's background is. And it seems more and more we have this growing list of reasons to dismiss and fear and abuse each other, and a dwindling list of reasons to be decent and kind to each other. We live in a world of fundamental attribution errors, this idea that people do things like they're late for work or they make a bad turn in traffic or, speed or brake too fast or whatever because of some moral or skill issue, not circumstances beyond their control, like in the case of an Uber driver, somebody yelling at them in the back seat or damaging their car or something like that. If you've ever talked to an Uber driver, that is not an easy gig and they make less and less money at it. But that's a tangent. Anything that weakens your decision making, moral or otherwise, and leads you towards the negative is going to get you one way or another, because our brains seek out what we feed it. If we're constantly feeding our brain negativity, that's like junk food. Your brain will start to crave it. It won't feel right unless you're criticizing somebody, unless you're looking down on someone. And then you get tired, and then it comes to the end of the day, and you start being hard on yourself. Or you may wake up hard on yourself, and your anti-immigrant sentiment is just deflection and projection of your own bad thoughts about you onto another person or group. And I personally think that's why anti-immigrant sentiment goes up in tough times. But we have a choice of how we tackle that problem. Do we blame the international students? And do we focus a lot of energy and negativity on go back to where you came from? Or do we go, okay, we've got a problem now. Let's solve it. Let's focus on solutions instead of blame. And yes, getting viable solutions to something is a big part, is the first step, is correctly identifying the problem, like the problem with me forming my thoughts right there. But if we don't correctly form the problem, and immigrants are not the problem, immigrants are a solution, albeit imperfect, to the fact that without them, Canada's population is going to dwindle and there'll be no one to pay our pensions. And people don't find that compelling right now, and I understand why. They're trying to make their rent this month. Never mind in 40 years when they retire, right? Yes, I've pegged this person at, well, I guess now it'll be like 29 because the retirement age is going to be higher by the time they hit that age. But, this stuff about pensions and GDP and all this stuff, inflation, that can seem overwhelming in itself. And that's where the petty comments about, oh, everybody, who runs a restaurant now is a particular ethnic group, even if it's not their kind of food. And that was one I heard recently, and I'm like, but isn't that kind of cool? Like, when there's a South Asian person running a Mexican restaurant or a Chinese restaurant or something like that, I think that's pretty cool. That's Canada, right? That's awesome. Also, if I'm really in the mood for Mexican and Chinese, I don't care who's working there. Why do we care? Because it's almost like that is the tangible detail of the chaos that we're all dealing with lately. And so instead of outwardly going, oh, you are to blame for the chaos in my life, instead of that, just go, okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling like my life is chaotic. I'm going to take a minute and validate that. And I'm going to focus on myself here and validate myself and soothe myself and take a couple deep breaths and tell myself, you're doing the best you can and it's going to be enough. Instead of externalizing, deflecting, and projecting onto other people. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. At nottherapyshow is our social media. Again, this applies to any outgroup. That's why the in-group outgroup is better than a particular issue to think about it. How can you see someone as like you instead of not like you? That's the game you can play with yourself. And it's kind of fun. It's a challenge before you make a judgment. All right? We'll see how this is. It might sound a bit crazy, but you know what I'm going to say? Your crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. Talk next time.